Hello Year 11 and welcome to the first video for our ninth topic. We're looking at probability here. What are the chances? Yeah, well anyway, that's what we're going to try to work out. So there's a bit of language we want to talk about first. We're going to talk about probability, at least for the time being, as being the result of some sort of game or experiment. And what might happen when I play that game. One of the possible results is called an outcome. Right? And for these real simple events, we're going to talk about equally likely outcomes. Like when I roll a dice, each of those numbers from 1 to 6 are equally likely outcomes. Now, if I list all of those possible outcomes, if I list them all together, that's called the sample space. That's an important word or phrase, sample space. And if I count how many outcomes are in the sample space, that's the size of the sample space. Okay, so an outcome is what could happen, one of the results. The sample space is all of the outcomes, and the size of the sample space is how many. So the sample space is a list of things, a list of results, a list of outcomes, right? Maybe it's heads and tails when I flip a coin. But the size is a number. It's the cardinality, if you like. It's how many things there are in that sample space. Now, we might apply some sort of a rule or condition to this game, to the outcomes, and I'm going to call that event. Now that might just be one, that might include one outcome, or all of the outcomes, or some of the outcomes, or none of the outcomes, right? Roll a dice, right? An event might be an even number. An event might be a 4. An event might be a 7, right? Now, of course, that's none of the outcomes. The probability of a 7 is 0. When I roll a dice, there's no chance of that happening, but nonetheless, that could still be an event. Righto. Now, the probability of some event, we've got a little formula here, is the number of outcomes in that event divided by the size of the sample space. Now, if you think about that, the size of the sample space is all of the outcomes. So the number of outcomes that are in that event can't be more than the size of the sample space. It could certainly be less. And that means that my probability can't be more than 1. It could be 1, that would mean it's certain, it's definitely going to happen, right? Roll a dice, what's the probability that the number is less than 7, right? There are 6 outcomes in that event, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And the size of the sample space is 6, so it's 1 divided by 1 equals 1. Now, so it's always, the probability is always a number, maybe a fraction, maybe a decimal, maybe even a percentage, somewhere between 0 and 1. Here's an example, and we'll just work through this. We'll be done the first one. So I've got a bag, and it contains 3 red balls, 2 white balls, and a green ball. One of them is chosen at random. What is the sample space? Okay, now here we go with this graphics tab. Let's see how we go. The sample space, we usually put these curly brackets around it, and it's red, red, red. Right, because there are 3 balls there, we'll call it 3 different outcomes. White, white. Oops. And green. Separated by a comma, curly brackets at the end again. Righto, and that's the sample space. Now, what's the size of the sample space? A similar but slightly different question. The size of that, 6. There are 6 balls in the bag. There are 6 things that I could possibly pull out. Now, what is the probability that the ball is green? If we remember, probability, so I'm going to write it like this. Probability, I'm going to put it in brackets here. That doesn't mean times. It's a different kind of notation here. Sometimes we use a subscript, but they get a bit cumbersome at times. So I'm going to write it in brackets like that after the P for probability. The probability of a green ball, right, is how many green balls are there? How many outcomes belong to that event? And there's just 1 green ball. And the size of the sample space is 6. So that's it. The probability of green ball is 1 over 6. The probability of red, well, you can see there are 3 red balls. So, unsurprisingly, we write it like this. Probability, bracket red, equals 3 red balls out of 6 balls altogether. And we could simplify that fraction. We can write it as 0.5 or 1 over 2. That's the probability of drawing a red ball from that bag. And finally, this is the last one, probability that the ball is not white. Okay, so I'm going to say probability, I'm going to say not white. And this idea of not becomes really important later on in this topic. Right, it's what we call a complementary event, or it's certainly hinting at a complementary event, which we'll learn about sometime later. But how many balls are there that are not white? We'll count them up. We'll find there are 4 of them out of 6. So my probability there, when we simplify that fraction, is 2 over 3. Righto, that's it for our first probability video. We calculate the probability of simple events by counting the number of outcomes in the event divided by the size of the sample space. It's easy to say that when you know what those words mean. Make sure you go over those, make sure you're familiar with them, particularly the difference between an outcome and an event. Well, that's it for the first one. If you've got any questions, please jot them down and ask me in class. You'll see at the end of the video there's a subscribe button if you haven't done already. It's up to you. I'll see you in class.